1, the third day of the week-long gap, Bastion went out to do what he'd been doing this entire time. Nobody knows where he goes all day, but at least for today, there was an opportunity to learn. Riley is going to follow because he's curious. Martine follows because those two are the only two he can talk to freely. Rivri had just been wandering around, noticed a gaggle of people she knows, and decided, fuck it, I'll follow too. Bastion wasn't exactly guiding. Not really. He looked like he and Riley had come out of the same B&B because Riley can't stay at the ministry while it's closed. Martine stayed in the B&B for double the price to have a room to himself. Since he's not eating double the food, the B&B operator took pity on him and gave him 2 onyx discount. Because they all stayed in the same joint, they met up for breakfast, and then the day was on. Are you... Bastion glanced over at Riley and then Martine, trying to figure out if they were all coming with him to do what essentially amounted to chores without any kind of income. He glanced over at Rivri when she walked closer and raised a hand in greeting before he repeated the question, in its entirety, to her in common. Riley stretched and nodded. I don't have work today, so might as well. It's something to do. I'm not used to sitting around, Martine shrugged. I do stupid shit when I'm bored. Rivri simply shrugged but nodded in greeting. I was unsure what else to do today. My search is fruitless. I am accustomed to being busy, and I do not do well with stagnation, so I will follow. Bastion opened his mouth, closed it. Opened his mouth, closed it. Opened his mouth, closed it. That's a lot of syllables for not a lot of value, he muttered in low Fossey under his breath, and then plastered on a smile. Sure, I guess. Since your day is fruitless, let's, He reached out with a mage hand and plucked a mango down and offered it to her with a crooked grin. Make it fruitful. Martine just about started his drink. Riley did his best to interpret, but started giggling, and it might or might not be hard to understand. Rivri took the fruit, and a soft sound escaped her, almost like a snort. Yes, I will assist, she relented, realizing she'd been laughed at, but frankly unable to muster the energy to be offended. You say a lot of big words for simple concepts. Bastion pulled down a few more mangoes and began to pass them around. He started cutting into his own with a knife. Is it because that's normal for your people, or because you think that we'll think you're stupid and throw you away if you don't? Riley gave Bastion a side eye, cleared his throat, and after interpreting that so everyone could understand, he looked to Rivri. Regardless, your help will be appreciated, I'm sure. Well, if the latter was a problem, y'all would have tossed me to the sea monster like 3 days ago, Martine snorted. Riley, we still might. He said this with a grin in all languages. Rivri's shoulders tensed. Take a deep breath. This is how I was taught to speak common. There are 2 dialects in my country, that of the moth and that of the Shadar-kai. There are 2 here as well. Bastion nodded. He didn't seem that surprised by the answer. We're speaking low Fossey when we speak the other language. I grew up speaking high Fossey. He shrugged. C'est simplement une façon plus prétention de la même chose. Riley leaned away from Bastion when he spoke high Fossey and blinked. You should teach me that. Martine looked as if he was thinking about something. The expression started after Riley translated Rivri's words and returned when Bastion spoke high Fossey. Might be off on this, but I think he said that it's the more pretentious version. His brows were scrunched together and he shrugged at the end. I said it's just the more pretentious version of what we're speaking. Bastion grinned. Riley watched Martine think, feigning watching smoke come out of the man's head. That was hard? Listen, short stack, I don't want to hear shit from you. You couldn't even understand him. That's like my 5th language, and the version I know is very different. Martine clicked his tongue, but had a small grin. It's not the only way we speak common. There is a form that is similar to how you do. It's simply spoken more often by the maternals. It's shorter. Common isn't the first language we learn. My native tongue is complicated, so that definitely affects our speech in common, she added before looking to Martine and Riley. So if I'm pretentious, that is why. It took me a long time to get out of it too. Bastion offered her half of his mango. Do you want some? Rivri took it, thanked him with a curt nod. She lifted her mask enough to take a bite, and a faint smile could be seen on what little of her face showed. Riley's smile grew more broad, and he looked over at Martine. Oh, I'm 6 feet, but the inches you can't see in my height are below the belt, he said as he said below the belt, he brought his arms forward, interlocking his fingers and bringing them downward. Listen, you would need another of you, Martine gestured to all of him, to even touch 6 foot. Bastion rolled his eyes and shook his head. Okay, so are you guys just gonna follow me while I'm doing what I'm doing? Because it's really not that interesting. He shrugged and started tossing down more mangoes with the mage hand. The children that inevitably came running when someone was willing to get them off the top of the tree were also given mangoes as Bastion filled his bag. More seemed to go in than was actually possible. When Martine made his dumb joke, Bastion looked directly into the middle distance like a man returning from Nam. He'd been to the bathhouse with Riley. It had been awkward all around. It was not a joke. Riley grinned at Martine and tossed one of his braids back dramatically. I mean, I could prove it if you need it. Nope, I'm good. Martine's thumb was rubbing some markings on his ring finger. If my wife didn't kill me, my second husband would. He looked mildly concerned for a moment and glanced over his shoulder. He's not even here, but he'd know, and he'd find a way. Riley stared at him for a few moments and then said, "That sounds like so much work." He looked over at Bastion. "So where are we going?" Bastion just shrugged. "I've got a couple places we need to go, so, follow me, I guess." He shrugged and nodded when Rivri seemed to immediately get the picture. He had a few more fruit trees in mind, and he knew exactly which public streets had them because he'd been doing these laps for a few days now. The next trees he took them to were a banana tree, passion fruit, and guava. Then a couple dozen limes and lemons. Each time he did, he handed out extras to the kids. There were a bunch of avocados brought down, and by the time they finished the route, they were nearly to the edges of the city. Tillaen moved up the rocky shore to what was a small plains-like smooth plateau before it continued to rise up to the rocky ridges of the mountain. Here it was lush, green, full of fields with food and people working them. Bastion started wandering down and reading the signs as he went. These mean public plot. He gestured to one written in Tillaen. We can pick from these as long as we follow the proper harvesting rules that were not posted anywhere. Riley looked around the green and inhaled deeply, taking in all the scents of earth and plants around them. I am assuming the rules are don't take more than your share and make sure not to harm the trees? Kind of, Bastion shrugged. It depends on the plant. He bent over and pulled a dagger out to start chopping the heads off of green onions. He never took the root, only lopping off the green. He pulled the big outer leaves off of some of the leafy green vegetables, placed them into a nearby pile of green neatly contained in a wooden bin, and then went back to harvest the more tender inner leaves. Again, he didn't take the roots. That was how he moved around the entire area. He weeded what needed weeded, pruned what needed pruned, and at the end of it he had quite the bit of veg tucked neatly away in his bag. Theoretically, it hadn't gotten any bigger. Makes sense, Martine said as he watched Bastion. After a bit he moved to another row and knelt. His knees cracked softly and he huffed and then began to pull things that he'd seen Bastion remove. Riley glanced at Martine after his bones decided to betray his age and said nothing, this time. Instead, he started doing what he could for the garden, pulling weeds and running his hands over the tree bark to gauge their health and see if they needed anything specific. Bastion was chattering as he worked, talking about how if you just take the tops, they'll keep growing and you can have a lot instead of a few. Or, if you take the leaves off the plant around them, they can grow better and you can break down and feed the dirt. And just this and that as he worked the dirt. You know, I'd never even touched dirt until I left the Isle, but I really like dirt, he hummed as he stood in the rich black volcanic soil. He'd left his shoes on the path and was wiggling his toes in the dirt while he peeled weeds. I took the brownie for granted, you know. Martine nodded. I grew up farming and ranching. My family has a lot of cattle. It took leaving to find out how much I missed it. The doll that had done nothing but swing on Bastion's belt until this point dropped off to land on its belly in the cool, soft dirt. It wiggled a little to get itself into the dirt just a little bit more. It seemed to sigh and wiggle its arms. Riley, upon seeing this, stepped over the doll like an angry cat. Wood elves spend so much time around ancient forests that we don't really think about the fact that there are people who do not take care of the plants around them. We try to work in harmony with the trees and symbiosis with the earth. A wood elf without dirt under their nails is something you would normally never see. He paused, unless you lived among the high elves like me. Not that they didn't have plants, but indoor herbs are not the same. There's just not a lot of dirt in Versailles. Bastion sighed as he walked. He was almost done with that section, and when he finished with it, he moved to the next one where he collected tomatoes and peppers. As he did, he opened a few of each and sprinkled the seeds over the recently emptied plot nearby. There's usually someone actually in charge of these from the government. They can tell what is a plant, so just put the seeds in there when you're harvesting things so that they can be regrown. They'll put the seedlings where they go, or put them in the compost if they don't need them. Lots of sand where I ended up when I left, Martine sighed, but one of my buddies could make her stuff grow anywhere, and still can. But he doesn't have to try as hard now where he lives. But he'd go get river mud and plant anything he could in whatever he'd find. Martine's knees popped again on his way up as he moved to a next area. Cups, helmets, boxes, whatever. Riley nodded at Bastion's comments. An elegant and simple system. All of the best ones are. He listened to Martine as he continued to work in the garden, ignoring and moving away from any shadows that were too small to be a squirrel or a rodent, but too large to be anything he was comfortable with. Then he heard the popping of knees and looked over at the strange human. "Are you okay? Are you falling apart?" "My knees would like to think so," Martine snorted. "Don't get old. It's no fun." Bastion chuckled under his breath and shook his head to go pluck herbs from a different patch of rich, dark mud. Lots and lots of them. Different flowers, different strongly smelling leaves. Some of them Martine would recognize. Some of them he wouldn't. Rivri watched as the three discussed plants, tilted her head over to gaze down at the dirt. "We do not have many plants in the dark forest, but we have many mushrooms. Our plants are often cave-dwelling and glow." She offered an input to this conversation, looking to the group. "But the same rules apply as well. Do not take more than is your right. The maternals do not like when the plants are disturbed." Riley glanced over to what Bastion was picking, but spoke to Martine as he watched. "I'm older than you." He turned his attention to Martine then. "By a lot, I think." He glanced at Rivri and nodded when she spoke. "Maternals? Are your people matriarchal?" Bastion cocked his head to the side and began to crush whatever was in the cups. He added water to both, heated them with prestidigitate, and forced one into Riley's hand. "Drink it." "You're an elf. It doesn't count. You're actually what, 20? Martine snorted as he watched what Bastion picked. He glanced up at Rivri when she spoke, having honestly forgotten she was there, and then back down at what Bastion was doing, trying to place all of the herbs and everything else Bastion was picking. He had a decent idea of what some were for, but not others. Rivri nodded. "We follow our queen, and very few men are in roles of leadership," she answered before looking to Riley. "They are the ones who raise the children, and do much of the work the Shadarkai are not taught to complete." "Lower work." Riley made a face. "No, late 20s, maybe 30. He accepted the cup and stared at it, then up at Bastion, then with a soft sigh he gave a swirl and swallowed almost all of it before he had to stop and breathe and gag a little before composing himself and finishing it. "Ugh, that tastes like honey if the bees were really mad at me." "Mid-20s, Bastion snorted through his nose, "if we're being generous." He shot a sharp look at Riley. "Drink it all." Riley scratched his arm as he stared back at Bastion, but drank what was left in his cup, which was not much. Bastion's hand went into his bag, and out came a glass jar of lotion, and he tossed it at the robes, knowing full well it would not strike the actual paladin, just hit his robes and fall into the soft dirt below. "Put the lotion on." Riley watched it hit the ground, and then let himself fall with it. "Ah! I die!" Martine watched the pair and then snorted. Mid-20s is generous. Bastion was clearly not amused at all by this. "Adopt a pet paladin, Bastion. Nothing will go wrong, Bastion. It's fine, Bastion. He just has dry skin and questionable decision-making skills, Bastion." Riley lay there for a second and then slowly grabbed the lotion and put it in his pocket. "I can't put it on. My hands are dirty." "I swear to God, Riley, I will prestidigitate you till your eyes squeak when you blink." Bastion dove over there and grabbed the paladin to get him to put the lotion on. Riley cackled but let himself be tackled and force-lotioned. Rivri tilted her head slightly as she glanced between Riley and Martine at the mention of ages. "You behave like a teenager for a man who claims to be an elder to the humans," she teased in her own way, with amusement laced in her tone. Riley wriggled and turned on his stomach to make attempts at crawling away from Bastion. I'm 94! Going on 22, Bastion grunted and used the new angle to drag Riley's robes up and lotion his back. If you just lotion your damn skin, you wouldn't be itchy all the time. Rivri shook her head slowly. I believe the 9 or the 4, but not together. Bastion doubled over with his forehead on Riley's back as he translated it for Martine through his wheezes. Martine barked a laugh, which quickly devolved into him doubling over with laughter. I'm with her on that one. Riley struggled and reached for the haunted doll. Why, he was not sure, but it noticed and gave a single roll to get further away from him and snuggled into the dirt once more. You bitch! Riley screamed, letting his hand fall to the dirt. He waited until he felt Bastion's hand stop and put the lotion away. Once that was done, he planted his hands until he was on all four, got his feet under him, wrapped his arms around Bastion's legs so that he could be stable, and then stood up fully. Well, where are we going now? He asked, looking back at the much taller man, who he now held like he weighed less than an empty backpack. Ah! Bastion grabbed him to hold onto Riley's shoulders, and then got his bearing. He sniffed the air and pointed in a few different directions while his ears shifted this way and that until he pointed down toward the upper city. That way. You smell that? He sniffed again. That way. Riley followed his hand and nodded. That way it is, and started walking. As they walked, the doll decided to spider crawl its way up Riley's leg to clip onto Bastion's belt. Riley was visibly uncomfortable with the whole situation. Rivri sniffed the air curiously. It simply smelled like salt, like everything else around here. Salt and a sort of must that was new to her senses. No, she simply stated, but that did not stop her from following without question at the source of the unnoticeable scent. I don't smell a damn thing, but if you say we go, we go, Martine shrugged, sidestepping away from the doll crawling toward Riley. It's fine, Bastion kept guiding Riley. They moved through the fields and areas until they made it to a house on the edges of the farmland where a few women were smoking and drying peppers. He hopped down off of Riley's back to pull dozens of peppers he'd collected, far too many than he would normally need. The trade was accepted. A few lovingly roasted and dried peppers contained in a banana leaf envelope for his piles of peppers fresh from the field. That was the way he moved through the city. A few tomatoes, a roasted pepper for a baggie of spices, a pile of herbs, and a healer for some salve to help Riley's skin. Another pile of herbs for a thick white paste he pressed into Rivri's hands. Their excursion ended at the shore. I need to check my traps. The entire shore was dotted with little floating bobbers in different designs and strengths. But Bastion walked all the way past the others until he found a set of blown sea glass bobbers with some sparkling golden magic inside. These are mine, he announced and pulled one up to check it for fish. Rivri had been hesitant to take the paste, but after a flash of the entire ordeal that Riley forcibly received, the lotion to his back flashing in her mind, she begrudgingly accepted the paste with a word of thanks. Riley had paid attention as Bastion traded, learning how people spoke and how they reacted, learning about how they did things and how they enunciated in order to properly speak the language. When they reached the shore, he found himself a spot to sit that was warm and had a decent-sized piece of driftwood nearby. He glanced up to watch Bastion every now and then as he carved the wood with confident hands. Did you make the bobbers? He called out to the young man in the water, who had a plushie hanging on him with a long string so it could float and drag along. Martine followed along, watching Bastion trade for different items and absorbing the culture. It wasn't too different than how Marines traded MRE bits and bobs. Yeah! Bastion looked up and grinned as he came out of the water with the first fish. He didn't let it suffer. He pulled his dagger cleanly through the head after laying it on a rock so it wouldn't need to be in more distress than necessary. They're neat, huh? He handed the fish to Riley. Clean it, for please. I'm gonna go get the other ones. Nifty trick. Those are cool, Martine grinned, and then pulled his K-bar to help clean the fish Bastion brought in. Riley looked up from the fish that was put in front of him and looked up and reached for Bastion's other dagger, grabbing it. He slid it into the fish and easily sliced it where it needed to be sliced and scooped the guts out to toss them to the side where they could be eaten by whatever carrion on the beach. Then he hooked the knife behind the skull and ripped it out fully, spine and ribs intact. Once all that was done, he started scraping off scales. Do you want slices or slabs? Thanks, Bastion grinned at Martine and then went back out to grab the other traps. Every time he finished one, he brought it up to the shore so he could inspect the hooks and rebait them. Anything is fine. I was going to bake them whole once the guts and scales were gone, you know? He went back out to the water to get the rest of them. They were all deposited over to the boys cleaning the fish. Once the hooks were rebaited with some chewed up stale bread from his bag, they were set back in the surf, the bobber on top, the hook around the middle, a rock to keep them from running away. Rivri had not offered to assist with gutting the fish. However, she did so choose to be helpful by ensuring the blood was rinsed off from the meat once said organs were gone. Bastion went about checking all of the tide pools for snacks, trading a few nearby with the women also combing the beach. He traded with some deep folk that came up, mangoes for seaweed and octopus. At the end, it all went into a pot and then came out of his bag, and the fire was built. This was going to be a spicy seafood stew. Martine filleted the fish the way he'd been taught, taking off the head and cleaning the fillets. It was a bit ungainly with his K-bar. It was certainly no fillet knife, but he processed the fish, weird as they were, as if he had processed a lot of fish in his life. Riley helped get everything into the pot and moved himself to a different place so that he could finish the shrimp he was carving before he slicing it from the driftwood and holding it out. Bastion! I made Carl a snack. It's shrimp. A snack? For Carl? Bastion lit up, and he smiled so wide it made his dimples show as he scrambled up the surf to inspect the shrimp. He dug around in his pockets until a multicolored sea glass crab full of golden sparkles that matched both Bastion's gently pulsing golden cracker-like markings and the other glass bobblers he had made. He tapped the crab and then offered it to the shrimp. Sure enough, it took it in its little claw and started to run away with its arm up like a wind-up toy. He's just a little guy. Martine looked up from the fish to ask who Carl was, when he saw the glass crab go scuttling up Bastion's arms. His eyes lit up. They move? Rivri tilted her head as she watched Bastion scramble up that way. What is that? She asked curiously. I enchanted them to move. Bastion nodded and offered the little crab to Martine. His name is Carl. He's made of a couple bottles and a broken window I found. He pat down his pockets and pulled out a few more. This is Fabio. He was a sunfish that flopped over, extra pathetic with some magic. He gently placed his hands over it on either side to remove the magic once more. I try not to wake him up too much. Then he retrieved a beautiful purple and teal sea turtle that slowly made its way across his hand. This one is Reginald. At Rivri's questions, he turned to show her too. They're my little guys. Riley smiled softly, watching Bastion all excited about his little guys. Poor Fabio, he's doing his best. Martine seemed to have fully abandoned cleaning the fish in favor of watching Bastion. Do you have more? Rivri nodded, curiously gazing down at the creatures that Bastion brought forth. The glass they're made from is very lovely, she offered, even feeling pity for Fabio. Poor Fabio isn't much more graceful underwater, Bastion admitted. I think I made him a little off-center. He began to pull out all manner of critters, from birds that would flap and fly away, only to faceplant into the sand if they made it too far from him, to little bugs and salamanders and more fish. They're just made of sea glass. If there's any clear, it's because I found a broken window. He smiled at his little dudes and then bit his lips. You have to promise not to laugh if I show you the one I just made. Carl's really old, that's why he looks so bad, but I'm really proud of my new one. I promise. Martine held up his hand as he returned to cleaning the last of the fish in front of him so that they didn't get weird in the heat or stolen by those harpies. Riley knew which one was coming. He'd been shown it a while ago. Honestly, it felt like so long ago and yet yesterday all at once. He was happy to see Bastion so excited. He had brought up the small glass creatures just so that the others could see how much the kid lit up when he spoke about them. Bastion had dumped his set of tide bowl finds and trades into the pot already, but the fish were going to be baked, so they weren't as needed immediately. So, this is Maria. Maria looked a bit like a deep folk, but not. She had a tail like human mythology, but the ears of a deep folk woman, and was absolutely stunning. It was clear he'd spent a long time collecting the perfect milky whites and blues and greens of all the different parts of her. Her cheeks were pink, her eyes glowed with the magic in them, and she smiled at the viewer. Not pity, nor seduction. Welcoming. She looked soft, and the rock she sat on moved her tail to show the weight and curve of each of her pieces. The way she leaned on it, adjusting the curve of one breast where the shift was clearly shown versus the other side that was relaxed. He sat there looking at her and gently ran his fingertips over her cheeks. "Isn't she just the prettiest thing?" he whispered softly. "I haven't had the courage to see what will happen if I wake her up." Honestly, it wasn't what Martine had been expecting, but he also wasn't surprised. He'd been that age, and he had a teen son. "She's real pretty." Riley nodded. "I think she's perfect. You did a really good job with her." Bastion just smiled real soft at the sculpture and carefully wrapped her back in the cloth and tucked her in his bag. "Thanks." Rivri hummed before nodding. "You clearly spent a lot of time making her. She is well made. And pretty." The last part was added after a moment of thought, wanting to ensure the compliment was received as intended, which was truly a compliment. "I forgot what deep folk look like when I made her." Bastion looked at all the other little glass toys in his hand. "I forgot what most of them looked like. They're all not quite like the real thing." He sighed. "But that's what happens when you're a stranger in a strange land. You start to forget what came before." Riley nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's how it can go." "I wish I didn't understand that as well as I do." Martine sighed as he walked to the water and washed the fish slime and guts and scales from his hands. Bastion stared at the animals. One by one they went back into his pockets before he only had Carl in his hands. The misshapen crab was lumps and bumps and a child's understanding of crab biology holding on to a little wooden shrimp in its claw. Carl was made on accident to comfort a scared child in a strange land with strange people and a strange language I couldn't understand. And now I'm home, but it's not the same, and it doesn't feel like I thought it would." He looked up at Martine, big gold eyes that he usually hid behind his hood. "Was it like that for you, too?" Rivri was silent as she listened to the exchange, her shoulders dropping slowly. She knew this feeling too well. Not the same situation as these two, but the forgetting of faces. When an entire race must wear a mask after childhood, the person becomes associated with the mask, no longer their own identity. "I imagine that was very difficult for you." "Yeah, some of it was. I wasn't the same person I was when I left, and that probably didn't help." "Yeah, some of it was that. Some of it was. I wasn't the same person I was when I left, and that probably didn't help. I don't really go back where I grew up. I should, but I don't. I made a new home somewhere that was more comfortable." He had a bittersweet smile and wiggled his fingers with all his tattoos. "With the people that made it feel like home." He stared down at Angie's name. It was almost her birthday. He was going to miss it. There was no way he'd get back in time. He sighed. He'd deal with that later. This kid didn't need all of his problems. Riley gently ran his hand over his sleeve in a gesture that was very much like running your fingers over the face of an old watch as you listened to the exchange. "That does sound difficult when you have a home to go back to." Bastion just shrugged. "My home was bad. It was bad. Not for me, don't get me wrong. I had a lot. It was bad for the roan who worked there. It was bad. I don't know why I miss it. But it's better this way. It's better that it's gone." He sniffed and shoved Carl into his pocket. "I'm going to see if the soup is ready." "You can still miss something that's not good," Rivri offered, but didn't push further. It was not her place to console, nor was she any good at it. All these emotions were confusing to her, but it was something to repent for in private, not to show weakness around others. Martine tilted his head as he listened. "I get it. Sometimes I miss where I grew up. Well, the land. It's beautiful there." He turned his arm over to a sunset landscape with a stylized sun, mountains, scrubby plants, and cacti, and held it out, if any of them wanted to look. "Sometimes I miss the people, even if most don't feel the same. I left when I grew up because it got bad." Martine shrugged. "A lot of stuff happened. Me and my father got in a big fight. Just about came to blows over it." He gave a half-hearted huff. "And then my dumbass pride put me somewhere worse because I couldn't stand to prove him right." Bastion snorted. "Mine was my mother. She's evil. She's dangerous. She's..." He glanced down at a puddle in the sand and then back to his soup. "She lives in every mirror and I can't get away." Riley closed his eyes and his fingers continued to run over something under his sleeve. That's one of the heaviest things to have to live with. He said softly, but I assure you, when I look at you, all I see is Bastion. Rivri tilted her head, confused. Is that not how one feels about their mother? The fear was natural. It is how she protects. Do others not fear their mothers? She asked softly, unsure if this was a question she should be asking. Martine nodded and sipped his soup. You are no more her than I am my father, no matter if much of them we see in ourselves. He turned to Rivri. Not usually, no. I love my mother. I guess there might be a little fear in every child, but not like that. Riley's eyes moved over to Rivri. Well, at least in my culture, no. We love our mothers, respect them, and there is a healthy fear. After all, she did bring us into this world and is very capable and willing to take us out of it. I would not say that would be afraid that she would harm me if I were to be in close proximity with her, or that she would wish me a punishment that was far more than I deserved or could take. Usually a soft chastising or a bump on the head was her choice. Never hard enough to really hurt me. Bastion smiled into the soup and shrugged. I don't think you're supposed to, but I do. He glanced up at Rivri and then back at his food. The hardest part is hoping. Hoping one day it'll change and it'll be different and you won't have to be scared anymore, but I don't think that's normal. Not for others anyway. He scoffed and shook his head. Hoping is the worst part. Martine gestured to Riley. That's how it was for me, though her preference was a shoot across the house. I swear that thing was a magic missile. He grinned a little, trying to lighten the mood. She never missed. Riley chuckled. Mothers do seem to have their own magic at times. I think that's universal. Rivri hummed, but did not expand upon her questioning, simply growing contemplative. A healthy fear, that was all she had toward her queen, and a healthy fear is what one should hold toward their mother. She had never received a punishment that she could not handle, as she was still alive, was she not? And she deserved the ball. Yes, that made sense. Bastion looked up at Rivri and stared for a few moments before he took the crab out of his pocket and gently tossed it in the sand at her feet. Carl is good at making things make more sense. I think you might need him more than me. Martine watched the exchange with a smile. It was settled. He was carving that kid a balancing bird. He bet Bastion would like it. Rivri stood there for a good few moments before she picked up the little creature. Why would you give him to me? He is important to you. She questioned. She couldn't even manage to hide her bewilderment. Because he already helped me, Bastion shrugged. In the sand, some distance away, the doll had built an entire castle around itself and now popped up out of the top, causing sand to scatter around it. Riley did his best not to look over at it, instead focusing on those around him that were not the creepy dolls. A bucket crab friend might be just something you need to remind you that you do have other people willing to be your friends. Rivri had a careful grip on the little creature, tight but not enough to damage him. Thank you, she muttered softly, strangely sincere for the woman who had muttered thanks with an air of unease. Bastion kept himself small, holding his knees with a happy, blinky smile in her direction, and then his ears perked up, and he sat up. You want to see Juan? Rivri nodded and stepped over, sitting down in the sand. She would end up with sand in her boots, but she honestly didn't seem to care. She would deal with the unease of her strange interest in these beings later. Right now, she truly did wish to see Juan. I also want to see Juan. Martine leaned over to get a better look. Bastion pulled out a small brown sculpture that he loosed and began to instantly scurry along the sand. Somewhere in the distance, in the direction of the Oracle Tower, you could swear you heard La Cucaracha! It was on the loose and headed directly at Riley. Riley had turned his attention to the plush that was now destroying his own castle as he stomped on it with his arms up, flailing around. It could stand up fully on its own, and he didn't like that at all. It was then that the dark shape moving swiftly in his direction was spotted, and with a truly undignified sound, he rolled away from it. The noise that escaped Rivri was not something she had even come close to making since she was a child. It was an outright snort and a wheeze of a laugh. She quickly attempted to tamper it down, but it was a failing attempt that ended up with her hand under her mask, covering her mouth. Martine almost choked on his soup. What came out was a spluttering cough perforated by laughter. He thumped on his chest, laughing harder. Warn a guy next time, he wheezed softly. Juan, destroyer of snacks, my most diabolical creation. Bastion cackled and dug his toes into the sand. He prefers long walks on the beach and sandwiches. He's great, Martine laughed, as long as he stays out of my snacks. Rivri was actively trying to breathe. Her mask was askew on her face. Her stomach hurt as she made horrible noises muffled by her hand. Riley stared down at the glass roach now that he had recognized it for what it was. Holding his left arm to his chest, the other held his upper body out of the sand. His knees were still in the sand, and his eyes were locked on the scuttering creature. Bastion just grinned wide enough to see the sharp points he had on both his upper and lower teeth. Juan is an equal opportunity purveyor of snacks.